Welcome to Rethinking Death.life, the podcast where we flip the script on the spoiler alert. Everyone dies.
Hosted by the witty widowed Death Doula duo,
Kathy Dempsey.
and Kim Harms.
We know our way around both life and afterlife prep. We tackle the big questions with humor and heart and a healthy dose of reality talk.
Whether you're planning your epic exit, pondering what's next, or just want to know if death really has a sense of humor, we've got you covered. Because rethinking death might just be the secret to truly living. Welcome to Rethinking Death.life, the podcast where we explore how to prepare for the ultimate 2-minute warning with humor, grace, and practicality. I'm your host, Kim Harms, death duel author and advocate for living your best life right up until the end. Today, I have a very special guest, my dear friend and fellow co-host and death doula, Kathy Dempsey. Welcome, Kathy.
Thanks, Kim. It's an honor to be here, and I am so excited to talk about one of my favorite topics.
And that topic is living funerals. Kathy, I'll admit, the first time I heard about living funerals, I was a little skeptical, but now I'm a firm believer. And for our listeners who might not be familiar, can you explain what a living funeral is?
Absolutely. A living funeral is a celebration of someone's life while they're still here and alive to enjoy it. Instead of passing, gathering someone after they pass to really share memories and stories and love, we do it when the person can hear all those wonderful words and feel the impact of what they've had on people's lives. It's like throwing yourself the most meaningful going away party without ever having to go anywhere, well, just yet.
I love that description. So many people wait until it's too late to say what's really in their hearts. What are some of the key advantages of having a living funeral?
Well, Kim, the first and most obvious one is the advantage that it allows people to express and receive love and gratitude in real time. So often the traditional funerals, someone will say, I wish I could have heard this. Well, I wish they could have heard it. Well, a living funeral solves that problem. It creates space for people to share their hearts while everyone is still present.
That's so true, Kathy. I've attended funerals where eulogies were incredible, but they also left me with wishing the person could have heard how much they were appreciated.
Sure.
Well,
Yeah. A living funeral can bring closure and healing to relationships. It's an opportunity for people to share their feelings and ask for forgiveness. I remember one that I facilitated that the person um, just apologized for not being the best father to his children or the best spouse to his wife.
that's that's really so important, and I can imagine it can be incredibly emotional, but in a good way. In fact, when my husband Jim died, and he died, he stopped breathing on one day on the 7th of August and came back after 20 minutes of no breath and no heartbeat. And we had a single day where we knew he was in danger of passing away. So we had a party. We had a big party for him. His family came over. He got
It's
to have
great.
all the Diet Coke, anything he wanted. They got to say goodbye to him, and he got to say goodbye to them. But most importantly, a brother who hadn't talked to him for many, many years
Wow.
came to this day, and they reconciled, and they were showing movies of the old times, and they were climbing Mount Whitney as 20-year-old.
Oh, that's
It was
great.
beautiful. It was beautiful. And because we had that time before Jim died, he died in peace of reconciling with his brother, and his brother has the peace that he has reconciled with his brother before he died. It was just, and you don't want to wait to reconcile before it's too late.
No, no, that is so healing that that was able to occur before he died.
Do you have some other stories, Kathy? I know you do.
Well, I guess the most personal story was about 10 years ago. My boyfriend at the time was suddenly diagnosed with stage 4 renal cancer. And we went through a difficult last year. He was placed on dialysis, but then he seemed to bounce back after dialysis and he would ride his bike for 15 miles in between. But as the months progressed, the cancer hit the brain eventually. He had a stroke and he was actually on the bathroom floor for 2 days. When he didn't show up for dialysis, I was traveling all over the country and I knew something had gone terribly wrong. So I called 911. The police got in, they got him. He was still alive. They got him to the closest hospital, which was Mayo Clinic. And I flew back immediately. And when I talked to the doctors, they just said, this is a gunshot wound to the brain. I mean, this is it. I mean, there's nothing else we can do. And so I had to do the hardest thing that I've ever had to do, and that was sign the papers to stop dialysis and allow Ron to die. And after we transferred him to an inpatient hospice unit, and I said, Ron, do you need anything? And he said, I want an interactive funeral. I'm like, what? What's an interactive funeral? And he says, I want to be alive at my funeral. I said, okay. So we made the calls and emails and posted on social media, and we packed the standing room only at the community room at the hospice center. And the nurses got Ron up in a chair, and he loved music. He was a musician, and he was paralyzed on one side. So he was playing like an air guitar. He had us laughing one minute and crying the next. And even his former wife stood up and told him what a great father that he had been.
Mm.
Recently, I did another live funeral for a speaking colleague. In addition to the 50 people that we had at his house, he was on hospice, we had 400 people on Zoom from around the world. It was an incredible, incredible event. And his wife said at the end, this is the best gift that my husband has ever given me.
Mm. Wow, that's just amazing. Oh, it sounds like living funerals can also ease the grieving process for the loved one. But one thing you left out, Kathy, just this would be a topic for another podcast. But what happened after the funeral? A big event happened after the funeral.
After the funeral with Ron, oh, we got married the next day.
We'll talk about that in another podcast.
Okay, another
That's a
another
whole
time.
nother, very, very, a wedding after the funeral, very interesting situation. But anyway, Kathy, when you were talking about the funerals, it sounds like living funerals can also ease the grieving process for the loved ones.
Yeah, absolutely, Kim. It's a way of building a bridge between life and death. And when families have a chance to express their feelings and say a goodbye in such a meaningful way, it really can reduce the regrets, the lingering, the what ifs after the person has passed. And it's also a chance to celebrate the life lived instead of focusing totally on the loss.
Yes, absolutely. I've noticed that people can be hesitant about the idea of a living funeral. What would you say to someone who's on the fence about it?
Well, I'd probably say ask yourself what's holding you back? What's the fear there? Some people are just so uncomfortable with facing mortality. They don't want to do anything that would acknowledge the fact that someone may die. But in fact, it can really free you up to live more fully.
That is just great advice, Kathy. I see that with people not wanting to get their legacy jobs done because they don't want to admit that they're going to die. It's such an important thing to acknowledge.
Yes.
So for our listeners who are intrigued and maybe even inspired, what steps can they take to plan a living funeral?
Well, first decide, do you want to have one? And then start by deciding the tone and the style. Do you want it to be intimate? Do you want a large celebration? Think about the venue. It could be your home, a park, your favorite coffee shop. Uh, Decide what you want to include. The music, the speeches, memory sharing circles or even slideshows. It's helpful to have a facilitator, though, I will say, someone to guide the event and keep it flowing smoothly.
And that's where a death doula like you or me can step in,
Right,
right?
right, exactly. And we can really help with the planning and the logistics and the emotional support to ensure that the event is meaningful, stress-free.
Oh, wow. This has been such an enlightening conversation, Kathy. Before we wrap it up, what's one thing you hope listeners take away from this episode?
Well, I hope they realize that living funerals aren't about dwelling on death. They're about celebrating life, and it's a chance to create beautiful memories and strengthen the relationship. So start the conversation, don't wait. And I will say, after Ron's funeral, they got him back into his bed, and I said, Ron, how are you dying so well? I mean, I'm the one who's supposed to be the expert on my graduate thesis on death and dying and teach me. And he said, Kathy, you die well by living well today, which was
Beautifully said.
profound to me because it means in a living funeral, it helps everyone facilitate living better today, whether you have 20 years or 20 days or 20 minutes.
Absolutely. Then that's the kind of the theme of our podcast, or Ron's words to you, which were just so meaningful and just so well said. Oh, wow. Thank you so much for joining me, Kathy. And thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in, Rethinking Death Not Life. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a review. And remember, it's never too early to plan for your 2-minute warning. Until next time, I'm Kim Harms, and my co host is our guest, Kathy Dempsey, encouraging you to celebrate life and rethink death.